Okay, so I think we're live on Facebook now. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for this. All right, hopefully everybody can see my screen and see our presentation. Welcome everybody. We're here to talk about renters' rights in Pittsburgh, specifically navigating the CARES Act and the eviction moratorium, which has been extended most recently until the end of this month. Today joining us, we have representatives from Neighborhood Legal Services, Fair Housing Partnership of Greater Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations, the Hill District Consensus Group, and Just Mediation, as well as resource navigators. My name is Megan Stanley. I'm the director of the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations. We're really happy to have everyone here and hope that you can learn along with us today. We welcome any comments or questions. You can just pop them into the video feed and we will answer those at the end. We're really going to go through 3 sections today. So we're going to start talking with our partners at Neighborhood Legal Services, and they are going to talk about legal assistance, the CARES Act, and the eviction moratorium. We're then going to talk about your fair housing rights with Fair Housing Partnership of Greater Pittsburgh and the Commission on Human Relations. And then we're going to talk about resources for renters. So that will include our resource navigators team and the Hill District Consensus Group, as well as the Just Mediation Pittsburgh program. So now I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our first presenters, which are from Neighborhood Legal Service, to talk about the laws.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Adam Debo. Like Megan said, I'm an attorney with Neighborhood Legal Services working in housing. So I'll be handling the legal aspect of, or I guess I should say the eviction moratorium and legal aspect of today's presentation. So I'm going to start off discussing the 2 laws that and acts that grant the major protections here, starting with the governor's executive order. So as you can see here, it was enacted on July 10th and expires on August 31st, 2020. It grants some suspended notice provisions, and the main protections here are a moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent and for the end of lease term. It does not protect you from evictions for breach of a condition of a lease, so those can proceed, during the moratorium. But any local statutes that you have may prevent landlords from filing. So that's kind of the first source of the major protections here. If we can go to the next slide, we can discuss the CARES Act, which is another source of major protections during the pandemic here. So a brief overview. This was enacted on March 27th and lasted through July 25th, 2020. So this has now expired, although some of the protections here kind of work in tandem with the governor's executive order and the moratorium, even though they are separate. So first things first here, during that 120-day period, non-payment of rent for covered landlords, and I will get into what those covered dwellings are shortly, they cannot collect late fees, they cannot send a notice to vacate or a notice to quit, and they cannot initiate a legal action to recover possession. And then after that July 25th date, the landlord must provide 30 days notice to quit prior to filing an eviction. So discussing those covered dwellings a little bit, there's 2 categories. The first is federally subsidized properties, and the second is federally backed mortgages. So for the federally subsidized properties, that's things like public housing, Section 8 voucher-based housing, site-based Section 8 housing, things of that nature, which also includes Section 202 housing for the elderly and Section 811 housing for folks with disabilities, as well as low-income housing tax credits. So most of your federally subsidized housing is going to be covered by that. The second category, which is federally backed mortgages, might be more pertinent to folks who have private housing to see if their landlords do have a federally backed mortgage. That includes all HUD-backed mortgages, USDA, FHA, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac mortgages as well. So pertinent to check and see if you have a covered dwelling. And then one thing more about how it works in tandem with the moratorium, like this says here, they are separate, but they do work together insofar as the suspended notice provisions also work with the CARES Act in order to grant a tenant a 30-day notice to quit after the moratorium is over for covered properties on after August 30th. So if we can go on to the next slide, we can discuss a little bit more of the protections and the defenses that the CARES Act is granting. So the four major defenses created by both the moratorium and the CARES Act are defenses for prematurely filed cases, defenses for improper notice to quit, illegal late fees and other charges, and failure to prove that the CARES Act does not apply. So I'll go into each one of these a little bit, starting with the premature filing of cases. So like we discussed, there can be no non-payment or end of lease term filings prior to the moratorium ending on August 30th. And as we discussed, there should be no notice to quit issued either. So if one of those notice to quit is issued during the moratorium, so prior to August 31st, that will be deemed to have been issued on August 31st. So it will not be effective until after the moratorium has run. Once again, if you fall into one of those covered property categories under the CARES Act, you'll get a 30-day notice. Now, this is different from certain notices that you would normally receive, such as a 10-day notice for non-payment of rent. So it does grant some extra protections for folks for non-payment if you are in a covered property. Now, this may present some issues for folks who have their notice to quit explicitly waived in leases, which is usually more of an issue for private housing rather than folks who might live in one of those covered dwellings. So it is pertinent for you to check your lease to see if you explicitly have waived the notice to quit, and also to remember to check and see if your housing is covered by one of those federally backed mortgages. So going on to the second defense here.
Hold on. But well, I guess if the property, if you have a private lease that does have an explicit waiver of the duty of the landlord to send a notice to quit, the governor's moratorium does apply, at least explicitly in Allegheny County, so that even with the waiver of a notice to quit, a landlord is not allowed to file any lawsuit for failure to pay rent or end of lease term.
That is correct, until the end of the moratorium, which is going to be after August 30th. So getting more into this improper notice to quit defense here, as we already said, covered dwellings have a 30-day notice, which is longer than most. And if you remember, those cannot be issued until after the moratorium is over on August 30th. If they are issued prior to that, and that could have been, any time prior to that, from the time that the CARES Act had started in March, then it will be deemed to have been issued on August 31st. Moving forward a little bit to the illegal late fees and other charges, I think this is one that might have been overlooked a little bit and can get lost kind of in the numbers. So it's important to pay attention to this one. This is CARES Act specific, so not necessarily working in tandem with the eviction moratorium in the governor's order. So it only is in effect from March 27th of 2020 to July 25th of 2020. But any late fees that have been accrued during that time are illegal and should not be charged to the tenant. So it's important to check the ledger if the tenant has one, and check the claim that the landlord is claiming in court to make sure that those late fees are not added. And this can also be a defense to late fees, as well as possible grounds for an affirmative action against the landlord under the Fair Credit Extension and Uniformity Act. So it can be a shield and a sword as well. Finally, moving on to the last offense here, failure to prove that the CARES Act does not apply. So there's a Supreme Court order mandating that landlords provide an affidavit to the courts and places the burden on the landlord to prove that the CARES Act does not apply to them. So this would be to prove to the courts that their property does not fall into one of those covered dwelling categories. So this is only through August 24th. So that date is quickly approaching. So there is a little bit of time where they do not overlap with the governor's order. But this would be the landlord having to fill out, it's a standard affidavit, filling that out and telling the court explicitly that they do not fall into one of the covered dwellings. You can assert this in the magistrate. You can assert this at the Court of Common Pleas level. And you can place the burden is placed on the landlord. So it can be reason to dismiss the case for the landlord not proving the burden as well. So if we can go on to the next slide, we'll just discuss what I think will be likely very common amongst landlord-tenant cases coming up, which is how to negotiate payment plans, how to negotiate the best outcomes for your tenant or if you're a tenant, negotiating the best outcomes for yourself and what to have in that payment plan to best set you up for success moving forward, and a little bit of things to avoid as to how to not maybe get yourself into a trap or get your tenant into a trap with that payment plan. So as you can see here on the slide, the best outcomes here are that you kind of want to separate the prior arrearages that were accrued during the pandemic. I say that as it's still ongoing, but during, I guess I should say, when the CARES Act was running. So you want to separate the payment on arrearages without a court judgment. Hopefully you can also get the landlord to delay the action until the tenant applies for available rental assistance, which I think some folks will be speaking on here today as well. And we'll make sure that the landlord cooperates with the tenant in receiving those funds, because if you receive those funds, then you can, reduce a large amount from the payment plan and hopefully not have to have a lengthy payment plan as well. Another thing that you want to aim for is the landlord bookkeeping the account as current and not charging late fees or penalties, so long as the tenant complies with the payment plan for arrearages. So I feel a common situation is going to be someone who hasn't been able to pay their full rent for a few months now, starting looking at March up until now. What you want to do is make sure that they're not continuing to rack up late fees on those arrearages, making sure that they can get a new, basically a new balance moving forward. Also make sure that a default on the plan does not immediately grant grounds for eviction. Allow the tenant to catch up within a reasonable amount of time, meaning that their monthly payments aren't so high that they can't make them. Make sure that you don't set them up for failure, and advance notice an opportunity to cure a plan default before the eviction process begins. So maybe if there is a default, a little bit of notice to cure that. I do want to get into some things to basically explicitly avoid in these payment plans as well. They're kind of the inverse of the best outcomes, but you want to make sure to avoid interest on fees and arrears. So like we said, those late fees, make sure to try to separate your arrears from a new balance moving forward. Avoid a judgment for possession against the tenant that's to be held in abeyance by the landlord. Oftentimes you can negotiate that the landlord will get possession, but will not act upon that unless the tenant defaults. You want to avoid those in this situation because of uncertainty moving forward. In line with that, you want to avoid a rent default occurring in an entry of judgment for possession for the landlord. And as we talked about, make sure to separate those past arrears. You want to avoid payments to be applied to past due renter sums, basically not really allowing the tenant to catch up ever. And finally, you want to avoid a waiver of new notice to quit. So like we said, always try to get the payment plan to have as many chances for remedy, chances to cure as possible. So those are a few things to avoid there, and working in tandem with the best possible outcomes for your client. So those are the basically the two major sources of protections are the governor's executive order leading to the eviction moratorium and the CARES Act granting plenty of protections. Those defenses are ones against prematurely filed cases, notice to quit, late fees, and a failure to prove that the CARES Act does not apply. Finally, ending with how to maybe negotiate some things outside of court, outside of litigation, and what to look for in payment plans. I think that will be all for the neighborhood legal services portion of the presentation today.
Great, thank you guys. And we're going to, I know there've been some questions about some of the legal aspects that Adam explained, and I know Adam and Eileen will be available to answer questions. We're going to do Q&A at the end because hopefully maybe some of these things will have been answered by that point. So we're going to move on now to our rights, and we're going to start with Fair Housing Partnership of Greater Pittsburgh. So Megan Comfer-Hammond and Ray Moore will be presenting on this. Just a reminder to turn video back on if you would like it back on, and to unmute.
Absolutely. So just to cover quickly, as I know the commission will also address it, but to understand what the Fair Housing Act is, and that's specific to housing discrimination. And so to recognize that housing discrimination under the law requires the presence of a protected class, and that federally the protected classes are as listed. And then we also have additional protected classes locally that are enforced by the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations. So once we have addressed race, color, national origin, sex, disability, and familial status, looking at the next slide is that we can see that there are additional protected classes locally in the city of Pittsburgh specifically regarding place of birth, sexual orientation, gender identity, status as a survivor of domestic violence, citizenship and immigration status, as well as language use. And what's important to understand is that if your landlord or housing provider is acting negatively towards a tenant based on this protected class because of one of these designations, then we're looking at, instead of a landlord-tenant complaint, we're looking at a fair housing complaint. And so understanding the two aspects in which a fair housing complaint is made is that the next slide understands that there's both what's called disparate treatment and disparate impact. And so if a landlord has explicit rules or statements that are against a protected class, that are racial slurs or comments regarding the presence of minor age children, or other provisions in which a landlord is treating a tenant worse because of their protected class, then we're looking at a fact that is a treatment case. However, impact case is also what's been coming up during the pandemic, because we're recognizing that the pandemic is worsening pre-existing inequities. And so the impact, for example, of a landlord who would choose not to accept money coming from the CARES Act relief funds would potentially have a disparate impact on people of color, for example, because of disparities in home ownership and representation in tenants of people of color. And so those are two important provisions when understanding whether or not a fair housing case is at play based on a landlord's behavior. So we only have a few minutes to cover a couple of fair housing specifics in terms of what to keep an eye out for. National origin has become a tipping point in the pandemic, where we can recognize in the next slide that COVID-19 is a specific name for the virus that the World Health Organization identified and created based on their best practices that were created in 2015, not to correlate a virus name with any identifiable group of people in any way, shape, or form. So while the virus may have been initially identified in China, it is in no way whatsoever correlated with Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, or any people of Asian descent. Any xenophobia is absolutely illegal and will not be tolerated. Is that any decisions a housing provider would make regarding COVID-19 must be based on the facts, must address where a specific tenant is relocating from in order to move into a property, not based on stereotypes that have no basis in fact, as far as understanding a potential tenant's exposure to the virus and any necessary quarantine or public or policy decisions that need to be made to address quarantine and safety for the property as a whole. So again, xenophobia or targeting based on anyone who is a person of Asian descent is utterly illegal and not allowable. And unfortunately, it has been seen in the wake of COVID-19 because of its early identifying where it arose in China initially. Also understand in the next slide is that harassment has been on the rise, where there's concerns regarding the idea of, as we are all quarantining, as we are all at home, of the upswing of tenant-on-tenant harassment. So recognize is that if another tenant is harassing you as a tenant, and it's because of a protected class. So again, racial slurs, xenophobic slurs, homophobic slurs, and that the engagement is based on a protected class, to communicate to the landlord directly in writing by email or text that that harassment is happening, why that harassment is happening based on a protected class, and then asking the landlord to take action, to intervene and to ensure that harassment based on a protected class is not in fact happening. There was such a case that it was occurring in the New York, New Jersey area that had made the media, and where the social media push is what compelled the police ultimately to arrest people who were racially harassing a Black homeowner. Additionally, recognize that landlord-to-tenant harassment, again within the Fair Housing Act, needs to look at whether or not that harassment is based on a protected class. We're seeing a lot of provisions of landlords harassing or really getting into tenant spaces regarding the payment of rent. While communication is important to convey to us in terms of what those conversations are, and if any of that harassment is coming from the basis of an immutable difference, such as disability, religion, and then who a tenant is as a person. To address in the next slide quickly, just a couple more slides here, is to understand that disability within COVID is that COVID is not necessarily a readily identifiable disability or identified as a disability within the act. There's still a lot of newness to that idea of the law. But to recognize that specifically, if the perception of a potential tenant's potential exposure to the virus is resulting in negative treatment by a landlord. So if healthcare staff were unable to move into a rental unit, is that there's a potential fair housing case to be made there where a negative stereotype is resulting in fears and behaviors based on the concept of infection, where again, it has to be science and fact-based regarding how a landlord is making determinations on how to set rules and policies related to the pandemic. Similarly, as new rules and policies are put into place, reasonable accommodations, which are a change to the rule or policy based on a disability-related need, are still required under the pandemic. And so if a new rule that we've seen, for example, is no outside guests are allowable in the unit or the property, that if a person with a disability has caregivers who comes to assist with daily life activities, that those caregivers, with proper precautions certainly, are still allowable in the property. So it is still crucial that landlords and housing providers recognizing the specific disability-related needs of tenants and to engage in that interactive process with reasonable accommodations as a means of determining how to best safely allow for and provide accommodations that are necessary for people with disabilities. And then to sum up, and then the last slide here is to look at race and the concept of impact, to understand that we already have massive racial inequities in the city that existed before the pandemic. The pandemic has worsened and deepened them acutely, just looking at the concept of the disparity between home ownership between Black and white families in Pittsburgh. And so with that understanding, it's crucial to recognize the disproportionate nature of Black and brown Pittsburgh who are tenants, and as a means of protecting our tenants, and as a means of ensuring that in the future, as we move forward, when the eviction moratorium does end, that eviction history as is considered in a tenant application, that the cost that might hit a person's credit because of the eviction process does not become a barrier that prevents access to housing in the future, because that will have a disproportionate impact on Black and brown Pittsburgh. And then the final slide is to sum up the concept of understanding who to approach in the nature of Pittsburgh's agencies, is that the Fair Housing Partnership is an advocate and investigative agency on behalf of victims of housing discrimination as a HUD-funded Fair Housing Initiative program. So for advocacy and assistance with understanding your case, please contact the Fair Housing Partnership. To directly file a fair housing complaint in the administrative process for a neutral determination on the facts as far as whether or not housing discrimination occurred within the law, certainly contact the Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations, which is a HUD-funded fair housing assistance program. Thank you very much, and we'll certainly be around and available with any fair housing questions that you have.
Okay, Jam from the Commission on Human Relations, I'm going to turn it over to you for the other side of fair housing now.
Great, yeah, so I'm Jam Hammond. I am the Outreach and Intake Coordinator for the Commission on Human Relations. So when you want to contact the government agency for discrimination in Pittsburgh, then you'll be talking with me. Just a little bit about the commission. The commission is a 15-member body that is volunteers, and it's backed by the commission staff, of which I'm one. And the commission enforces the anti-discrimination laws that are written into the city code as well as the federal legislation, in this case, the Fair Housing Act. We do enforcement of civil rights in employment, housing, public accommodations, even though today we're talking about housing. And we investigate discrimination as a neutral fact-finding agency. So as opposed to FHP, which is an advocacy-oriented agency, we're neutral fact finders when we go into a complaint to determine whether or not discrimination was present. As Megan said, the discrimination must be based on a protected class. And in the city of Pittsburgh, it has to have happened within the borders of the city and within the past 365 days. We act as a legal entity. We make legal findings. We can file subpoenas for information and witnesses. And we also provide the possibility of mediation and settlement. We also do what we're doing right now, which is civil rights education to the community for free. So if you ever want us to come to your community or to a school or anything like that in the city of Pittsburgh, we're always happy to do that. And we also do 2 other types of cases, civil rights cases, and then community detention, which we mediate. Megan's already given us a good overview of the protected classes. The protected classes are here on the screen, and then there's also retaliation. So if you were to make a complaint regarding your civil rights, and then they were to say, okay, we know that you've made this complaint, and therefore we're going to take an action against you, that's an example of retaliation, and that's also illegal. So a couple of examples of things that's prohibited to do when it's based on a protected class: refusing to rent or to sell housing, refusing to negotiate. So if they're giving one person the ability to say, I'm able to pay this rent, and they're able to go back and forth, versus another person of a different protected class identity is not able to negotiate, then that's another example of illegal discrimination. Making housing unavailable, and also the falsely stating that housing is unavailable. So if someone were to come to see a house and they were to say, oh no, there's no vacancy, there's no place to live, even though it is listed, that is, again, illegal discrimination. Providing different services, facilities to different people based on a protected class, harassment, using different qualification criteria. So all of these are illegal under the Pittsburgh City Code and under the Fair Housing Act. A couple of examples would be, so let's say that a landlord in response to COVID is saying that all the international students need to wear masks in the public areas, although none of the other tenants do. So that would be a difference of terms in their lease and on the basis of their national origin, which would be illegal under the Fair Housing Act. There's also, perhaps a situation where the landlord is being overly cautious, and discrimination is not always intentional, not always based in, attempting to do harm to a person. Let's say that a landlord wanted to say, okay, I know that people who have underlying medical conditions are especially vulnerable to COVID. That means that I'm going to make sure that there's a curfew for anyone who has a disability to come back to their house at night. That would also be illegal under the Fair Housing Act, giving them a different term or different services access to facilities than somebody who does not have a disability. One of the more recently added protected classes is preferred language. So let's say that a landlord does an interview with a potential tenant, and they notice that when they pick up the phone, they start to speak Chinese, and then the landlord says, oh, actually, I don't think that this is going to work out. That could potentially be discrimination on the basis of preferred language or on national origin. So these are just a couple of statistics from the commission from our most previous year, 2019, to give an idea of the types of things that we do. So in 2019, we referred 12.5% of increase to another agency for further assistance. So one of the things that's a major component of my job is I do the intake, I listen to what someone needs, and there might be something else that they need that I can't provide. So it's my job to kind of keep a list of other organizations that are in Pittsburgh that someone could be able to use to access what they need, whether or not they're going to file with the commission. We took in 78 new complaints, 23 of those were housing complaints, and we closed 26 housing complaints. 77% of those housing complaints that we closed received relief through a settlement. So when you go through the process of a housing complaint, you make your complaint, the respondent submits their response, and the investigation happens. If at the end of this investigation, or in the course of this investigation, the parties are able to get together and to come to an agreement on how they could best resolve the issue, then it goes to a conciliation or a mediation, and the complainant is able to receive some relief through a settlement. And we participated in over 20 educational and collaborative projects. So the types of stuff that you're watching right now, working with other organizations, coming out to the community, and making sure that Pittsburghers know their rights. We've been doing that in the past year, and we can always do more of it. I believe that's the last slide for me, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jam, and to Fair Housing Partnership for talking about fair housing rights in regards to renters' rights. I want to invite all of our resource navigator team to put themselves back on video and unmute. And I believe that Miss Carol is going to start talking about the Hill District Consensus Group and the work that they do.
Thank you, Megan. Yes, my name is Carol Hardiman, and I'm with the Hill District Consensus Group, actually the program and executive director for the Consensus Group. So the Consensus Group, we have been working with renters on renters' rights projects for over 4 years now. We host a renters' rights workshop monthly pre-COVID, and now we're hoping to move our workshop online, but we came together with other community partners when COVID really started affecting folks that we were concerned about evictions and just tenant rights. And so we are working in partnership with the Community Justice Project and also Neighborhood Legal Services. And so we're just really happy to be here. And so why our help matters is we want to help prevent eviction and homelessness as much as possible. We also want to help reduce or put a stop to community unrest, because a lot of these evictions and the displacement was going on in our communities for many years. And so we just want to put a halt to that. And then we want to also ensure that our beloved residents' needs are met during COVID-19. Next. And so this is the realities of what can happen if we don't have our navigating programs and our partnerships to prevent eviction, which the moratorium ends this August 31st, I'm sorry. And we believe it will become a domino effect, meaning that if people get evicted or if there's mass evictions, other systems will become overwhelmed, especially our food and our kids' education systems and so on. Also, there's no real emergency housing plan or homeless shelters if we do have a mass eviction. So that means more couch surfing and more outbreaks and more people living on the street and more unrest and discontent in our communities. Next. So I want to tell you a little bit about our free navigating services. Well, introduce you to them. And then I'm gonna let Abby Ray speak a little bit more in detail because she's our help desk provider. So as I said recently, we consensus group partnered with several other partners, and we decided that we wanted to help people as much as possible navigate to food, utility payments, application services that are in regards to unemployment, maybe some utility programs, all type of resources so that people can be better off. We even help people with direct people to healthcare services. Say if people want to be tested for the COVID or just have a regular checkup, we can help you direct you to there, and also various food programs and available housing around Pittsburgh. So Abby's going to explain more detail about our help desk, and Swain, he's on our legal aid side, and he's going to explain about our legal services as well. Abby?
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. As Ms. Carroll said, the Rent Help PGH Help Desk is attempting to provide broad service access and support to our clients. We are very focused right now on the CARES RRP applications, and most of our navigators are working with many clients to successfully compile all of the supplemental documentation for those. We're partnered with Pittsburgh Hispanic Development Corporation and the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. So we are able to provide services in Mandarin, Spanish, Portuguese, as well as English. If you need telephone numbers for any of those, feel free to ask during the comments and I will shoot those out. We work with clients in all of Allegheny County, 250% of federal poverty level or below. We are also able to work with clients across the state. So if you do hear of people who are needing help accessing resources, you can send them to the help desk and I will try to connect them with someone in their area that can better assist them. I think that's everything I have.
Yes, thank you, Abby. Swain, can you tell a little more about the legal side? Because what's unique about our services, we actually have a legal service, so we're real happy about that. And that's Swain.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ms. Carroll, and thank you, Abby Ray, and thank you, Megan, for putting this together. So my name is Swain Uber. I am an attorney with the Community Justice Project, which is a Pennsylvania statewide legal aid group. And as Ms. Carroll described, this collaboration is something that people have been working on long before COVID, and it kind of just fell into place with a lot of people working very hard to make sure that people who needed the help or needed help to get access to all the assistance that is being created actually, got the services that they need and the kind of hand holding that we know it takes to get through all the various barriers that people face in accessing these services. One of the primary goals of this program was, so we applied jointly with Neighborhood Legal Services, kind of as a 1-2 punch, which we envisioned as we're going to be providing resource navigation services with our partners at Hill District Consensus Group and Pittsburgh Hispanic Development Corporation, but recognizing that without legal services, that can only get you so far. So our primary goal and my primary role in this is engaging with Neighborhood Legal Services, working to streamline the referral process. So anyone who comes in our door, our metaphorical door, is able to get connected to Neighborhood Legal Services and also be receiving the resource navigation that we know is essential for people's stability and essentially the validity of their legal claims, especially once the moratorium expires. And we are also working with Neighborhood Legal Services to streamline the process in terms of working with clients that come first to them to be able to provide resource navigation services when they identify that there are individuals who are in need of rental assistance or various other services. So it's kind of a try to do both things, try to make sure that we get people the law, when they need a lawyer, we get them a lawyer, and when they need resource navigation, we work on that front as well. We also are able to, because neighborhood legal is not able to serve specific individuals, in particular undocumented individuals, we do accept for housing and landlord tenant related issues clients that are in these sort of situations. So if there are people who you know, or if you yourself are undocumented or someone in your family, feel free to call either depending on what language folks speak, either the Spanish language hotline and get connected to Guillermo and Maria and the great team out at PHDC, or call Abby Ray at the main help desk, and she will be able to get you in touch with whoever is needed. If we are not able to represent you based on various other, we do actually, we're in the process of building a referral and payment line. So we will connect you with legal representation through whatever means, and please reach out. We understand that, if you do feel that is a need, please reach out. We're here to help. So, thanks.
Thank you, Swain. Megan, before you go to the next slide, I just want to give the number out so that people can probably write it down, and then Abby Ray can put it in the chat as well. So for our Spanish helpline, that number is 412-530-5244. For English, 412-534-6600. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide, please?
I can, but actually right before we go, Abby Ray mentioned RRP, and I think it would be good for us to say what RRP is.
Sure. You want to explain that, Abby?
Sure. The National CARES Act that was passed at the start of COVID distributed funds to the states. Here in Pennsylvania, we had the Pennsylvania CARES Act, which allocated, I think, $150 million to rental relief due to inability to pay rent since March 1st, i.e. due to COVID. Folks can qualify for up to $750 a month for 6 months between March and December. That is paid directly to your landlord. There is also a complimentary mortgage program for folks who are behind on their mortgages. We are able to assist with either. A very cool thing about this program is it is per person on the lease. And so if you know of households with multiple people who have lost income, all are able to qualify up to the coverage of their rent each month. Additionally, Allegheny County has matching funds and utility support, and the application is an all-in-one. I will say the application is very complicated. And if you know of anyone who is going through an inability to pay their rent and has lost job, please send them our way. It is more than meets the eye, and we are glad to work with anyone and hold their hand through the process.
Yes.
One other quick note, there is a website that you can register yourself or work with someone else to register, and that's renthelppgh.org. And we can share that in the chat as well.
Great, thanks Swain and Abby, and Carol, there you go.
Thank you. This is my favorite piece. So if you click one more time.
Oh.
We are here for you. Please reach out to us today. Thank you. Thank you, Megan, for having us.
Thank you, guys. So now we're going to go to sort of our last resource, which Aaron brought himself onto video, is the new mediation program. So I'll let him explain that.
Thanks, Megan. It's always so good to hear about the collection of resources available for our community right now in such a trying time. So wanted to just really quickly overview Just Mediation Pittsburgh's work, which is to be able to provide community-supported mediation for landlord and tenant disputes, for housing disputes. So that comes around at a time when our eviction crisis is even more exacerbated than it was before the pandemic. And we are here to be able to offer free mediations that are voluntary in nature in the pre-eviction filing process specifically. We can also work with cases that have made their way to the magistrate courts, but the vast majority of cases that we work with will be pre-eviction filing. So either landlords or tenants will be able to request mediation on our website, justmediationpgh.org, and fill out a pretty short referral form so that one of our staff members can get in touch with you about pursuing mediation. Mediation would be a chance for landlords and tenants to both be able to share about issues that they've been experiencing in some kind of a housing dispute, whether that's inability to pay or a habitability issue, or some kind of a noise complaint, neighbor complaint. We handle all sorts of things that tend to boil up sometimes if they're not addressed, to lead to the point where rightly or not, an eviction might be pursued. So we're trying to avoid that in the courts and give landlords and tenants a chance to be able to resolve their disputes on their own with as much power as they would have at any point in the process, to be able to stay stably housed first off, but also be able to provide landlords with access to the income that they deserve as well. So we encourage folks to choose mediation if they think they're able to sit down online for now, across the table from the other person on the other side of a housing dispute. So mediation is certainly not for everybody. You need to be able to communicate your perspective, and you need to be able to listen to somebody else communicate theirs as well, which is always the key piece there. But it's really a good opportunity to be able to have a lot of control over what happens next for you. So you and the other person, whether that's the landlord or the tenant, are able to craft a legally binding agreement that gives you both clear direction for yourselves about how you expect to move forward to resolve the disputes that you've brought to the table in really clear, concrete, and specific ways. So you see the process here listed in a flow chart. Essentially, the referral process is being able to fill out a form online at justmediationpgh.org. Our staff follow up with a phone call to make sure that this case is appropriate for mediation. And then we pass the case along to our community mediators. So we have a pool of, right now, about 25 trained mediators in the community to be able to mediate most of these disputes, although we also have a trained mediator on staff. And we will be, the community mediators will be reaching out to be able to prepare parties to sit down with each other before the mediation actually occurs in step 4 there. Mediation takes some time, so we ask for folks to set aside a few hours to be able to mediate, just to allow for as much time as needed to be able to really hash out the issues together and come up with an agreement that works for everybody, that makes sense, that's specific and measurable and really attainable. Once a mediation agreement has been reached there, then JMP staff will be able to refer folks to the necessary resources that they came to in their agreement to help them make that agreement really work for them. So definitely excited to be working with the resource navigation team, as well as other resources around the city to be able to help folks meet their needs from a mediation. If you want to go to the next slide, Megan, I just want to highlight that we are training additional community mediators. So Just Mediation Pittsburgh is funded to be able to really help communities resolve their own disputes together. We trust community to be able to take care of each other and solve our problems together. And some training can help make that happen. So we already have 25 trained community mediators, but we will be training an additional, I believe, 24 over 2 weekends in September. You can see the times listed here for the weekends of September 11 to 13 and 18 to 20. So it's a very long training. We'll be very honest about that, but it's an opportunity to be able to assist in being able to mediate disputes between landlords and tenants. And each community mediator who completes a mediation receives a pretty generous stipend, $150 per mediation. So there's some significant time that goes into that, but this is something that can exist on the side of whatever folks are doing to earn their money right now. Opportunity to be able to help your community, really chip in during a time of extreme need right now, and also be able to make a little bit of money as you do that. So if you want to apply, you see a link here to visit justmediationpgh.org/get involved, and you can fill out a short application for these trainings coming up in the middle 2 weekends of September.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself here. Thank you for sharing that. And I think the community mediation training is a really great opportunity. As you said, if you are somebody who is hoping to make a difference but hasn't really known what to do, but you want to get out there and help landlords and tenants resolve issues, I think this is a fantastic way to do that, and you'll get some great training and experience along the way. All right, we are going to, I believe we're at the end of our slideshow now. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if everybody else can come back onto the video so that I'm not alone. Hi, everybody. We're going to move to question and answer. So I think that we have some questions, some posed in the Facebook comment section. And I think that Jam has been watching that. So Jam, I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you can just say who you think the question is for, if it's for a specific person or anybody can answer.
Yeah, so this first question is from Tiffany Connects. I believe it's for Adam. And they ask, how will you know if your landlord has a federally backed loan?
So this is fairly difficult. There are a few tools that I can get the information for and put that in the chat. I mean, one of the things that you'll have to rely upon is your landlord filling out that affidavit, but the issue is that does run on August 24th. So after that, you'll have to use one of the tools that I will put into the, actually I found them right here. I can copy these. Now these are more specifically for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac mortgages, but I know Eileen may have some more insight in this.
Yeah. First of all, if a renter lives in multi-family, in a large multi-unit building that is federally backed, meaning a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac mortgage, then those well, that lookup tool, I think it's the lookup tool that Megan put in the chat, although I guess it won't be put in the chat, would help to find the type of housing, to find whether or not it's a federally backed mortgage. So most multi-family housing, there's another tool, there's another lookup tool actually, and I guess it won't be shown on Facebook anyway. So
we'll move all of the resources over to Facebook, and any that you think of later, we can add to this thread so that people can find them in the same place.
Okay. There is an enormous problem, however, is that if a tenant lives in a single family unit, meaning a house that is mortgaged by a federally backed mortgage, there is no way to know for sure. There's no way to look up as a tenant, because the only lookup tools that are online are those which require the landlord's social security number, and I don't know of any landlord who would divulge that number to a tenant or even to the tenant's lawyer. So that's why this particular affidavit, which the landlord is supposed to complete and sign and file with any eviction case, is supposed to essentially advise the court that they don't have a federally backed mortgage, and that they have looked it up themselves online to double check. But that doesn't necessarily prove that the landlord knows that at all, or has done that lookup at all, or is telling the truth, or even understood what that affidavit means. And so we do urge anybody who is facing an eviction case to call neighborhood legal services, as well as the navigators, but to call neighborhood legal services as well, because not that we'll be able to look it up, but at least we know what we can do to try to force a judge to force the landlord to provide more proof. There's one other thing though, is that actually if the owner of the property has obtained COVID assistance over this period of time, meaning that they obtained forbearance, the right not to have to pay their mortgage during this period of time, then, and that right not to pay the mortgage can extend through for a whole year. And throughout that period of time, even after August 25th, and even after August 31st, those owners cannot, and so long as they're getting that forbearance benefit, not having to pay their mortgage, those owners are not allowed to evict either. So in fact, for a certain number of tenants who live in homes that are mortgaged by federally backed mortgages, those tenants can continue to be protected and prohibited from being evicted even beyond the deadlines of these moratoriums. You need a lawyer to help you with that.
Yeah. Do you, Adam or Eileen, can you just tell us the phone number that people can call to get in touch with Neighborhood Legal Services?
Certainly, I will. We have a few, so I can get both of those in the chat right now.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Go ahead, Megan. Another person had asked, is this just for individuals in Pittsburgh? And that's going to depend on each agency. So I'll answer for CHR. For Pittsburgh Commission on Human Relations, that's for individuals who are inside the city of Pittsburgh. Their housing is inside the city of Pittsburgh. Outside of the city of Pittsburgh, there's an Allegheny County Human Relations Commission, and there's a Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. So you are still covered in terms of civil rights in housing. But to contact our organization, it is inside the city of Pittsburgh, although you can contact us and we can give you the phone numbers for what you need. And I'll let other organizations kind of give you their service radius.
For Neighborhood Legal Services, we have offices in Beaver, Butler, Lawrence, and Allegheny counties. So we do cover those 4 counties.
For Rent Help PGH, we service all of Allegheny County, but we can also receive clients from elsewhere in the state, at the very least, to help navigate them to proper resources in their county.
The Fair Housing Partnership provides fair housing advocacy for Western Pennsylvania.
And Just Mediation Pittsburgh serves the county and the city.
Great. And then there was one other question. Is Carol still on?
Yes.
Carol, is there like a service radius for the Hill District Consensus Group in terms of the resource navigators?
Could you repeat that?
For the resource navigators, is there a limit in terms of where the person is looking for assistance?
No, just like Abby said, we're doing countywide, citywide, and a little bit beyond Pennsylvania, like, West Virginia, Ohio, the borders. And, if you call the number, if we can't help you directly, we're always happy to find you or point you in the right direction.
Great. And then one other question that was in the chat, it asked, does the Commission on Human Relations do paired testing? And that answer is no, we do not, but I'll have FHP talk about it.
The Fair Housing Partnership certainly conducts testing-based investigations, wherein testing is community-based. And so if any community members are interested in volunteering for social justice, you are welcome to visit our website, fhp.org. Under Take Action is volunteer to be a tester and to submit your information for contact in order to attend a tester training. So absolutely, we need any and all volunteers in the community to come forward to fight for social justice and to support inclusive and integrated communities in our world, in our city. Because when we find evidence of discrimination, we then use that evidence to take enforcement action, certainly.
Megan, could you give the 1-minute overview of what housing testing is?
Fair housing testing is typically what's called match pair testing. And so what happens is we take a protected class, such as race, if we're testing for race discrimination, and we have what's called a protected tester and a control tester. And so all the variables amongst the potential tenants are controlled for, except for the protected class. And so when both testers inquire into available housing, then if there's any differences in treatment and change in behaviors and the availability of housing, the structure of testing is such that the only basis for that different treatment or denial is based on the protected class of which the protected tester is identifying as in that investigation.
Yeah.
Also call it mystery shopping for housing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Megan. And what will happen in a complaint with the Commission on Human Relations, if we do have a complaint that looks like it would need testing, either we'll refer the complainant to contact FHP, or we can contact FHP, I believe. Megan, I think Megan Stanley could talk a little bit more about it if necessary, if I'm saying something incorrect.
No, you're right. If somebody has, I mean, I think testing, and the other Megan can correct me, but testing is often used when somebody's applying for a unit, right? So at the application stage, something seems off, or there's an advertisement that seems like maybe some further testing would be helpful. So when we get reports of that, sometimes somebody sends us the Craigslist ad that they saw, and they're worried that it's discriminatory because it says, no children allowed. So we want to see, is this really a familial status case? So we would contact FHP, let them know about this. They would conduct the testing, and then they can file the complaint if there is an issue with HUD, and it often gets transferred to the commission to investigate.
To clarify, is that housing discrimination is all too often left in a he said, she said space. And so the purpose of fair housing testing is to substantiate or not substantiate allegations of housing discrimination. So testing both protects tenants and it protects housing providers, because it disproves accusations of false discrimination, and it proves cases of housing discrimination as a means of achieving justice and a change in behavior.
And then the last question that I saw is also from Tiffany Connects, and they were asking about neighborhood legal services. Is it a free service?
We do have some qualifications, but if you do qualify for neighborhood legal services, yes, it is a free service.
But the financial eligibility limits for helping tenants right now is an income of up to 250% of the HUD poverty guidelines. If your income is no more than 250% of those guidelines, then I tell my clients, you're lucky enough to be poor enough, but they're not lucky at all.
And I'm assuming, Eileen, that those guidelines are probably linked on Neighborhood Legal's website, if people don't know the percentages off the top of their head.
I'll presume that as well.
Okay, if not, we can always,
But
we can post that as a resource.
I mean, with that being said as well, if they do call into the intake and they are found to be not eligible, I do believe we always provide referrals to the Allegheny County Lawyer Referral Service and other places that folks can look for representation as well.
Great. Jam, any other questions?
Do we have time for more questions?
I think we have a few minutes if there are any more questions we want to go over for the group.
Okay, let me take a look. So here's one question. Actually, does Just Mediation Pittsburgh work with only residential tenants, or could they also work with commercial tenants?
Good question. Good question. Right now, we're working with residential tenants. If a commercial tenant wants to reach out and explore some options, then we're happy to do that. But our program is one for residential tenants primarily.
Thank you. And then, are there any other questions? Let me see. So, I know that there are there's a state moratorium, and there's a county moratorium. How do all of the moratoria affect one another, and does it create a more complicated situation for people for tenants?
Yes, I can answer that. Yes, because if there's mass evictions and people end up on the streets and the homeless, and there's no homeless shelters, no emergency housing, it will overwhelm every system possible, starting with food, your children's schools, because can you imagine being a parent and you're evicted and living on the streets and trying to send your kid or homeschool your kid at this time? And also, can you imagine being evicted and ending up on the street and won't be able to wash your hands or the proper hygiene things at this time in the middle of COVID? So yes, it will be a domino effect, and it will be so horrible. So we're just really hoping that people will get involved, call us for the help that they need. I know there's a lot of programs out there right now at this time. It doesn't matter. Call out to someone and get the help that you need. And our services are totally free. And so, you know, it's here for you. Don't wait and don't be afraid of landlord intimidation or none of that. If you do run into those things, call everyone on this panel, and we'll try to help you in the best way that we can to keep you housed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. I know you're a tireless advocate.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't even imagine it. And then, you know, as far as these systems, when I say people have to understand that these systems, as far as even your kids going to school, is not even set up properly. So, you know, we don't got time to be homeless or dealing with evictions. We need to be in our houses so we can get you a food box or whatever you need. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. So everybody here, as you said, is here to help and to provide resources and to refer to trusted partners and programs, because it is confusing right now. So I really appreciate that, and appreciate everyone on this panel for making time today. Jam, did we have any more questions, or was that it?
I think just one last question. So if somebody is coming into just mediation process, or a complaint with our office, who can be an advocate for that person if they feel that they need one? Is there a restriction who can be an advocate?
That's a good question. Yeah, community mediation is determined to work with folks to be able to be supported in their mediation process. So if somebody feels like they have an advocate that they want to include in the mediation process, we want to be able to work with that. One thing that we do try to encourage is people to participate without the barriers that you face in court, where you're worried about what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, because it's a confidential space where the communication that happens in there does not leave that space, with the exception of the mediated agreement. So if somebody is interested in having an advocate with them to be able to make sure that they're communicating clearly what they need to communicate, then we encourage that, and we work with that. And we've talked with the resource navigation team about being able to either refer people ahead of time to be able to make sure that they have their ducks in a row, or being able to certainly follow up afterwards as well to be able to support effective agreements.
And I think also making those referrals to legal assistance when it seems like somebody either needs a legal consultation, or if something doesn't go as planned and an eviction is going to move forward, making sure that they get legal resources as soon as possible.
100%, yes.
I also want to add, because you know, coming from a lawyer's point of view, sometimes I'm concerned that people make agreements, even with the best intentioned efforts in mediation, that they may not fully understand or appreciate the legal consequences. And so if anybody were to participate in mediation and reach an agreement, but still have questions about whether to sign that kind of an agreement, then I would hope, and I think it's accurate to say that the mediation project would allow for tenants to, if they're eligible for legal services, to contact legal services, and we could review any type of agreement like that with the tenant and give our own best advice about that.
Yeah, yep, we're not pushing, we're not doing our job well if we push people into agreements. So folks who need to take time to have discussed something and then review it can have that opportunity.
Great. Thank you for clarifying. So it seems like those are all the questions. Those were great questions. So Thank you again, everybody who tuned in, and this
you, Meg.
video will be available to watch in the future if you have questions, and we will post some resources. And thank you to all of our great panelists for all of their help.
Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks,